My parents went away for the weekend, so I decided to invite a friend to stay over. This happened a few years ago, and no, I wasn't supposed to invite anyone when my parents were gone, but maybe it was a good thing. We played board games and card games all night, just hanging out, not glued to our phones, enjoying each other's company, and talking about the most random things you can imagine. I guess I was 16 years old. Yes, I was only 16 years old. My friend was a year older than me, so she was 17. We weren't dating, she was just like a girlfriend to me, and her name was Hannah. I lived in a pretty nice house growing up. I won't lie, my mom is a doctor, and my dad runs a fairly successful pressure washing business. When I was an only child, so I was pretty spoiled. I guess you could say I always wanted a brother or sister, but my parents couldn't have children after me. They thought about adoption, but they never did it. Anyway, it was around 9 o'clock when Hannah arrived, and my parents had been gone for hours, so we were ready. My room was upstairs, and that's where we often hung out. When you left my room, straight ahead, there were stairs parallel to my bedroom. My room had its own private bathroom. Across the hallway, there was a large window that showed the entire back part of my house. I remember when I was very young, I always felt scared walking around, especially at night when I was alone in the house. We had a pretty large backyard with a pool, a play area, and a nice shed in the back, all surrounded by trees, and what I mean is a vast forest, maybe 3 hectares or more, so someone could really spy on us and we would never know. Of course, my parents had cameras, but there were many blind spots. The cameras were infrared, but you could only see shapes and maybe estimate the height of what they captured, but there were definitely no specific details at night from a distance. Anyway, I wanted to take a shower, so I did. Hannah hung out downstairs in the living room and waited. After just a few minutes of showering, Hannah ran upstairs screaming my name. "Lucas, come here now! There's someone outside in the backyard! Hurry!" I put on my clothes so quickly, and didn't even bother drying off. I put on my shoes and grabbed my gun, which was locked in my parents' safe in their bedroom. I closed all the curtains in the house, and made sure all the windows on both doors were locked. We sat in my bedroom with my gun. She called the police, and I called my mom. The police were on their way. My parents were a few hours away, but they immediately stopped what they were doing and got here as fast as they could. I kept calling my mom the whole time, explaining what was happening. Then suddenly, we heard a window shatter. Hannah screamed and ran to my closet. I was the one with the gun, so I had to make sure we were safe, even though I was scared and my heart was pounding. I had to protect us. And at that moment, I knew what I had to do. I ran out of my room, and at the top of the stairs I yelled, "Hey, get out of here! The police are on their way, and I have a gun. If I see you, I'll shoot you." I heard a loud banging downstairs that sounded like it was coming from the kitchen. I heard hurried footsteps throughout the house as he searched each room one by one. He tried to break into my parents' safe, but failed. Luckily, it might have turned into a shootout if he was armed. That night he took some valuable items belonging to my parents, like some expensive jewelry and a few other small items. He tried to flee shortly after, but the police arrived as he ran out. It all happened right before my eyes. One of the officers handcuffed him, and they took him away. Apparently, he had a warrant for his arrest for a separate case of burglary and armed robbery. Since then, my parents never let me stay alone at home, and I don't want to stay alone at home, at least not in that house. This happened like 10 years ago when I stayed over at Alex's house. He was the best friend at the time, just your average weekend. You play with Nerf guns, eat pizza, drink Mountain Dew while playing Call of Duty and Halo on Xbox Live all night. You know, almost like every kid in 2012 did. It's more mysterious, like a story, and I'm sure most people I tell it to think it's just fiction or I'm crazy, but me and my friends know it's true. Since that night, I'm 100% convinced that such things exist as the paranormal, or whatever you want to call it, unless you know what I'm talking about. Like ghosts or demons, maybe not exactly like that, but something bad and very disturbing. Something we as humans can't fully comprehend. So we were up in Alex's room, just me, him, and Sebastian. We were just having fun taking turns playing Halo and Call of Duty, because the three of us, and he only had 2 controllers. Suddenly, Alex turned off the TV and made us all immediately quiet. We all heard what sounded like someone screaming as loudly as they could. It was a crazy wailing sound that, according to Alex, he sometimes hears. It's worth mentioning that it was 1 a.m. in a dead-end street with only one streetlight with very little light, so we had to squint to see. We saw the silhouette of a super tall creature running like a deer across the street. The wailing sound slowly diminished as it moved away from us. "What the hell, Alex? Is that a ghost?" he said. "What do you mean, a ghost?" "You saw it too. Now, if you can sit here and lie to yourself and say it's a human or some kind of unknown animal species, then go ahead. But it clearly wasn't an animal, and definitely not a human. Whatever it was, my guess is as good as yours right now." The strange creature that looked like a skinwalker had completely disappeared from sight, and we couldn't hear it anymore. Alex kept staring out the window, though he seemed like he was going crazy. "Hey, buddy, okay?" "He might sit down and have a drink of water." He then started crying. The emotions of all this overwhelmed him, and he couldn't control it. He had been experiencing disturbances apparently for years, and he didn't know what to do, and no one else saw it except us 3. He knew that his parents wouldn't believe him, and they'd think he was crazy. I think he was relieved that, after years, someone else actually saw what he was talking about. Of course, he didn't want us to see it because it traumatized us too, but I think it gave him some comfort knowing that it's real and he's not crazy. But maybe even more uncomfortable knowing that it's real is truly terrifying. Apparently, he still hears it from time to time, but he chooses to ignore it completely. And nothing bad has happened yet, and we hope nothing bad ever happens at all. It was the summer of 2014, and I was 15 years old. I stayed over at my friend George's house that night. It was a regular occurrence, and I often stayed there sometimes more than 2 or 3 times a week during the summer. After all, he was my best friend, and we were still kids, so it was really normal. George and his parents had a lot of property behind their house, maybe about 7 to 8 hectares, maybe more. Honestly, they had a big shed, a cornfield, and some really cool trails in the woods that we usually visited. We'd ride our trail bikes and 4-wheelers. I felt like a bad friend for this, but I didn't even know it was his birthday when I arrived there. After people started showing up, more friends and family, I realized he told me that today was his birthday a few weeks ago. Oh man, I thought, I didn't get him a gift. I immediately apologized to him, and he took it very well. In fact, he told me that he didn't want a birthday gift from his friends this year. He didn't expect anything because of how good his parents had spoiled him this year, which made me feel better, but I still felt guilty. We did all the usual stuff you do for a 15-year-old's birthday party. We had cake, presents, and we kids spent time playing outside with the new airsoft guns he got for his birthday. He already had quite a collection, so we all had our own to play with. I won't go into too much detail, but we decided we wanted to make teams. It was me, George, and another team consisting of Evan, Scott, John, and Kyle. They had more people, but we had better guns. The essence of the game was to shoot them before they shot us, so we all ran around the trails in panic trying to take down the other team before they caught us. After a few games and leaping around for 2 hours or so, it was around 6:30, so the sun was starting to set. George and I agreed that we should all go back inside and play some video games before everyone had to leave, because everyone wanted to keep playing with the airsoft guns outside even though it was getting late. It was George's birthday, so he was nice enough to let everyone choose what we should do. It was clear that we'd play outside longer according to the sound of it, so that's what we did. We restarted the game, and we all had about 2 minutes to get ready and hide wherever we wanted. George shouted, 3, 2, 1, go! This time George and I were alone. We had ventured quite far into the trails by now, and he instructed me to follow him further into the woods. We ran along the path towards the treehouse that had been built long ago. "Are you sure they'll come back this far?" I asked George. "I mean, it's getting dark, and I doubt they'll think we'd go this far." "Yeah, they might not," he said. "But if they do, they won't be able to get us before we get them. And besides, it'd be funny if they couldn't find us." As time passed, the day grew darker, and George whispered, "Hey, we might need to head back in a few minutes." He continued, "After all, it's his birthday, so I want to do what he wants." "Do you hear that?" George whispered. "There's someone or something walking quite close to us." We thought it was them, but we heard our friends yelling and talking further away in the distance, so we immediately ruled them out unless they split up and tried to trick us. Don't offend them," I whispered, "but none of them are smart enough to think of that." "Oh man, rough," he said. He looked at me, shrugged, then put his finger to his lips and said, "Whatever it is, it's getting closer." After a moment of silence, we could finally see a tall, slim figure standing in front of us. We thought they couldn't see us. I whispered. George said, "Yeah, it's definitely not one of our friends because whatever it is, it's as big as a grown man." And none of the teenagers would stand still as comfortably as possible. Thankfully, it was dark by now because from where the person stood, it was clear they couldn't see us. The person began to walk in the opposite direction. Now, the last glimmer of light that illuminated the woods for so long shone directly towards the unknown figure, who seemed to be wearing some sort of ghillie suit. George didn't want to take any chances, and immediately jumped down after the strange figure disappeared. "Are you crazy?" I asked, but he insisted I follow him. So I did. I was scared, but I'd be even more frightened if I were alone, so that's why I went with him. We ran in a different direction from the usual path to get there. He said he knew a better way back home, through the cornfield that ran parallel to the trail we had taken. As soon as we jumped out of the treehouse, though the figure that looked like a ghillie suit we assumed was the strange man, heard us, and started running towards us. We had a little distance between us and him, and that was a good thing. We ran much faster because I didn't know what would happen to us or either of us if we weren't faster. We ran screaming all the way back. Our friends must have realized we weren't joking because they also started running towards us and walked towards us only a moment or two later. We all arrived in my backyard, and my dad would surely scold us because he ran out without wearing shoes at all to save us. George and I told him everything. My dad immediately called the police, but there wasn't much they could do because they couldn't find those people, and because I couldn't provide a description. The only thing I can really say is that I will never go back to that trail again, and I highly doubt George will either.